that you were carrying that you were able to down with this person's permission?
Probably guilt.
Yeah. That's a heavy burden, right?
Yeah, because you think you should be feeling one thing, but you're feeling another. So when you're able to reconcile those conflicted emotions, you just feel whole, and you can put guilt aside. And that enables you to actually love in a more full way towards my mother and others too.
That is Shannon Kenny, the guest for today's episode. In today's episode, you'll hear Shannon share the story of how she reconciled with her mother, toward whom she had felt resentment growing up. Not an easy topic to discuss in a public forum. Join me in holding space for Shannon to reflect honestly. Welcome to the journey of realizing empathy. I think we all have experienced the moment in our lives when we suddenly empathize with somebody we previously did not, by experiencing a moment of realization. One where we went, aha, oh, or maybe even burst out with laughter concerning something we either did not or had incorrectly assumed to understand and appreciate enough. While these realizations can sometimes be had in a few minutes, it can also take years. In fact, it may never happen. It is a seemingly simple yet complex and lifelong process of realizing empathy that I wish to explore in all of our episodes. Hey there, listener. My name is Slim. I help startup founders in their maturation as a leader and a CEO by helping them confront themselves in a true mirror. And I believe few things serve as a truer mirror than the challenges we face in our interactions with other people. The Journey of Realizing Empathy is a show where we explore how our challenges with other people can ultimately serve as a true mirror that helps us mature as leaders and human beings. In each of our episodes, we host a guest who tells a story of a time in their life when they struggled to empathize with one or more people until a series of realizations moved them to empathize with those very people. Welcome, Shannon. Would you be willing to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. I'm Shannon Kenny. I'm a social entrepreneur and founder and CEO of the technology company Prontopia.
Excellent. And I just want to make sure that I acknowledge how much I personally appreciate you for coming on the show, because before the show, we briefly mentioned that empathy as a word has somewhat become weaponized in this era. And I think it's become more difficult to talk about empathy in a nuanced way than ever before. So at times like this, I really appreciate your courage to be willing to come on a show and talk about our own personal stories of a time when we had difficulty with empathy. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And I do agree. I also think it's critical to humanity is storytelling, and key part of empathy as well.
Absolutely. So before we begin to dive into your story, would you introduce us to the relationship between you and the person or people that we'd be talking about today?
Well, my story today is about one of the most important relationships in all of our lives, and it relates to my mother, Carolyn Kenny.
Excellent. Where would you like the story to begin?
So I'll start in the context in which just introducing my mom, who passed away in October of 2017. And she lived a tremendous life. She is a world-recognized pioneer of music therapy.
Wow.
She used her groundbreaking and fierce work in the creative arts therapies to then become a leader and advocate for the arts as vehicle for social change. And then in the third chapter of her career, while also a brilliant musician, she became a human rights activist, I would say, for Native and Indigenous rights around the world. That said, in order to have such a tremendous impact on the world, I didn't have a traditional childhood necessarily.
Right, yes.
So I had some resentments. She was gone a lot to
Yes.
achieve these things.
Yes.
It was not your typical family life as a child growing up at times. So
Thank you for starting off with a strong emotion like resentment. I think it's one of those emotions that is very universal across all humanity.
yeah, resentment is when there's a disconnect between human needs. And I think in the relationship with your mother, I would have guilt about that resentment. She
Right.
and her life had stages. So that was during a key time of my life that I didn't really understand what was going on with her career. Although I admired it, it still meant it had effects on our household.
Yeah. Would you
So
be able
it
to
took
share
time and maturity.
what it was like back then?
It was chaotic at times.
When you say chaotic, meaning?
She's just a creative person. She's one of the most beautiful minds you would ever encounter that I just would soak up intellectually. But there's a darkness and a light. And so it meant she went and lived away from us for a year at a time on a few occasions, from adolescence to teen. She definitely made her best effort to keep up family traditions, but having a mom absent is just hard when you're a kid.
Yeah. So what was it like to have her absent? How did you cope with that situation?
Well, initially, I actually just thought I'll fly solo and fill her shoes, which...
Were you an only child at the time?
It was me and my brother.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. And my parents were divorced. Let's face it, it was a little bit destabilizing post-divorce.
Yeah.
I did want to support her. I was old enough to know that the work that she was doing was meaningful. And I thought I'll fly solo.
Wow. I mean, let's pause there for a second and make sure that we recognize and appreciate. How old were you at the time when you thought of supporting her mother?
I was about 14.
So just to put this in perspective, 14 is the so-called tween years, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's an adolescent time. It's a turbulent time. It's not an easy time. And for you to be able to come to a place where you recognize that although it's difficult, you still like to be able to support your mother. Thank you for your willingness to do that at that stage in your life.
Well, I thank you for recognizing that. And love comes in many forms. So does family. So she did things that gave a container for that. It's just that the circumstances were a little bit radical at times.
What were some aspects that you found most difficult during that time?
Probably uncertainty.
Uncertainty about?
We moved a lot. So uncertainty about like where to identify where this would all land.
As in like where we would eventually stabilize?
Live. yeah. Not that it wasn't a matter of means. We had just moved so many times.
Give us an idea of like how frequently you moved.
We moved, I had attended about 12 change schools about 12 times. So I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana. We moved to Vancouver, British Columbia. We moved to California. We moved back to Vancouver, and then we moved back to California. And so then a few years after we settled here, then she started, I didn't know if it was temporary or not. So she made a few moves. It was academic, attending programs, teaching as a visiting professor. But given how many times we've moved, and as an adolescent, I think the uncertainty was just about where is home.
Yeah, and I would imagine I moved, but not 12 times.
Yeah.
I mean, I can at least appreciate the tie into our identity, right? Like, where do we belong? Like, do we call ourselves New Orleansian, or are we Californian? Are we Vancouverian? What are we? Especially at that time, that can be very confusing.
Yeah, because eventually you're heading it. You really want to say, this is who I am. And pertaining to the uncertainty about does place matter? I think once I had my own children, just circling back on that, I had to grapple with it again, because now here you are, you have to understand how do I want to move forward from my experiences as a mother now. So in understanding with my daughters, I actually began to have this epiphany that my heart is my home. And I put the destabilizing perspective of moving so much behind me. And I just had to change that understanding. And it even came into some of the rules with my daughters. I said, look, these house rules go with you. They're not about the house. They're about you.
So when you were raising your child, there were a set of rules that you wanted to make sure that you shared with them. Is that right?
Like kindness and just some core character. And so
Values.
that was really interesting. Yeah, to say that this goes with you. If someone's in our home, we would like to not bite or things ranging from toddler to. But that it's not that these are the rules of our house. It's that this is what you carry with you.
Where did you begin and sort of work towards, I need to have these conversations with my, is it daughters?
Yes, I have 2 daughters. I think when inevitably they start to socialize in other homes and they want to push boundaries and say, can I just eat all the sugar I want if I'm not at home? Or should I? So I would say kind of when they entered school. Now they're 20 and 17.
At the time?
Oh, at the time, 5 and 6.
Got it. So the conversation around values had to have some kind of an anchor. And typically these values are talked about as like house rules. But then that's prompted you to think about, is it merely a matter of this house or is it something else? And that sort of provoked you to reflect on what house and home is to you. And you moving around played a really big role in making you realize that it's not just about a physical location that we call home or house. What was it like to have that moment of thinking about home and what that means at that point in your life?
It was really a big pivotal moment because it kicked me into gear in some goals for myself. So it may have been timing, but it actually ushered in my next kind of career path. And I gave myself permission to pursue a career of meaning. Let's
talk about that. It seems like one of the major milestones on this journey was you feeling like you had permission.
I was just really unhappy and a disaster, to be honest.
Qualify that. What do you mean by a disaster?
Yeah. I just couldn't find my own compass. And 2 beautiful children, and pursuing a career path was a compromise that, again, you're theorizing like this should be fine, but it just wasn't fine. And so, to be honest, I had one really good friend that just said, Shannon, why don't you look at things through a different lens and give yourself permission to take care of yourself, because this is not working right now.
What were you wrestling with that prompted her to say that?
Confusion and a little bit of despondency about how to regain a foothold on my career path, and like ideas about what I would like to pursue while still ensuring that those choices attend to raising a family.
Is this a situation where you had stopped working to raise kids?
No, I had just taken a different career path than the one that I'd originally set out on, that I was passionate about. So I was trying to understand how to get back to
I see.
A career of meaning.
So originally you had a career that you enjoyed, but then in order to spend more time with the family, you switched careers to make more room in your life. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that wasn't actually as fulfilling as the previous one, and you felt a little bit stuck when this conversation with your friend happened.
Exactly. Got it. And I'm actually just hearing now that we're speaking about this, it is interesting intergenerationally to see a lot of that inner dialogue and inner confusion may have related to my experiences with my mom. You know, what should I do here?
When you say the interesting and intergenerational relationship, what would you be referring to?
I had her as an example. So I did know that it's okay to be a powerful woman and lead and make courageous choices in your career. And that in doing so, why wouldn't I have just had that utter confidence? I'm just going to go for this career. But I think in your family life, you're looking at your own experiences, you have your own kids, and you want to weigh in on how you're going to make it work. Because it still really requires a lot of sacrifice for women today.
Right. So what happened after that conversation with your friend?
Well, I set out and I created my first company.
Oh, so when was this?
In 2007.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was my first journey in entrepreneurship, and I'm grateful for that. It's sometimes the moments that don't seem like that they will be such a breakthrough that later are.
What was the breakthrough?
I actually sat down after that moment and did a personal exercise to understand what was blocking me. And I saw that I was involving my children in the career direction decisions that I wanted to make. And so then that was the double layer, that this is fine. This is good for me. It's good for them.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by you were involving the kids?
Well, so I had an academic background prior to having children. I was pursuing a career as a professor of history, Italian history. And so I started a summer camp in Italy for international children. And I originally wanted to use my academic background to regain that world, play around with arts education. I was really committed to certain styles of education at the time, certainly travel as a way to generate global understanding. And then, to be honest, the first year I just was like, hey, I'll be able to introduce my kids to something meaningful to me and have a business that enables us to be there in the summer.
Wow. So so now I understand. So when you say involve your children in the decision-making process, we're not simply talking about having a conversation about what do you think your mother should do? We're talking about
100%.
The very idea of raising children becomes part of what you are doing, both personally and professionally.
Yep. I definitely involve them. Yes, I totally involve them. So that's how they grew up. I still got feedback at that time, some pushback. Should you be doing this right now?
Pushback from
maybe more people with more traditional perspectives on
acquaintances,
motherhood.
your friends, or
friends and acquaintances. In general, support, but some pushback.
Sure. Would you be willing to share what emotions you felt when some people were giving you some pushback?
It made me think, should I reevaluate this? Is this the right thing to be doing?
Some doubt. You felt some doubt.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Confusion. Anything else?
When I would have feedback like that, I would feel a little bit guilty, which I think career women listening to this can relate to that.
Absolutely. What happened next?
Ran that company, became very compelled to start this company, Prontopia. And Prontopia is an investment funded technology startup. With the initial investment, we had the validation to go forward. And it was at that point that I received my mom's very serious 4B cancer diagnosis. And
at the same time,
6 months into founding this company.
Oh.
Yeah.
So what was the timeline between you getting the funding and then hearing the news of mom's cancer?
We had the initial funding to do the customer discovery and validation of the baseline data to see, is this a go? About 4 months prior. And then the data looked good. I was obtaining additional funding, moving forward to the next level of beta. But with this news, I had to dig deeper. And I think on this journey toward attaining empathy toward my mom, one thing that I thought about was like, can I go forward on serious caregiving responsibilities and grief? And what does this look like? The work is intense. And the first place that I landed was to understand my relationship with her and try to reflect, how does that pertain to my capacity to guide this company through this personal storm? And I identified joy and an affinity with her work in social change. It was so inspiring, intellectually stimulating. She's a really brilliant thinker. And that really filled me up. In that moment, I felt so connected to her.
So hold on for a second. Let's rewind a little bit. What year was this?
This was 2017.
Okay. 2017, you receive funding. And then within 4 months of that funding, you hear the news of your mother with cancer. Is that right?
Yes.
And then the major question that you had to wrestle with was, can I go through with this company? And
yes.
in a very important juncture, because you just received funding, which means the added sense of responsibility and the burden of carrying that weight is immense at that point in time. Right? So you are being very mindful of the kind of duty and responsibility you have for the shareholders and thinking to yourself, okay, I need to be very practical and real about what's going to happen. There's going to be grief. There's going to be caregiving responsibilities on top of the responsibilities I already have as a mother. and as a founder of a company. And did you have employees at the time or?
No employees.
So the responsibilities of your children, the company, to the shareholders, and also now to your mother. And help me go a little bit deeper into what was the significance of diving deep into your relationship with your mother?
The significance was that I saw that the channels that we shared our passion for social change would connect me to her and give me strength in continuing with the venture. And I knew that, so Prontopia is personal assistant services on demand. We started in travel and we're now in the senior space. But I knew that essentially what we're trying to solve with Prontopia is to build technology that serves the needs of people and not the other way around, to regain building technology as tools from a little bit more of a perspective of humanity.
Yeah.
And so there's such a tremendous social impact opportunity. But at that time, raising investment, especially pre-seed, you're told, do the social impact thing later, grow, and then that'll complicate things at this phase. And I really became unequivocal that I see this as the biggest opportunity for the company. Personally, as a founder, it fills me with my mission and vision every day. And so I had the courage and conviction to say, this company is a social impact company, and the metrics that chart our growth and profitability will go hand in hand with measurable social impact in some areas that are going to be much needed in the coming decades.
I see. So let's put a little bit of structure over this. So at the heart of the question lay, can I go forward with this company? And then you were exploring your relationship with your mother. The major insight you gathered was your relationship to mother re-solidifies how you will make this company go forward. Because once again, I'm just guessing, at the time, there wasn't as strong of this sort of social impact aspect, but that became very front and center as the guiding light or the guiding principle, if you will, of how you will lead the company. And letting this incident with your mother become the direction of the company makes it possible for you to not only have a strong yet difficult conversation with the investors about where the company is going to go, and to yourself in a very important way on how you will be able to handle this in a way that keeps everything that you believe that you have responsibility towards afloat. Is that the way in which you're connecting this?
Yes, absolutely. And you felt it. I think in these two key watershed moments that we've spoken about, it's so fundamental to what's brought me here today. I can almost feel as if I was in the moment of that.
What emotions do you feel when you can go back in time?
I was grief-stricken and having to grapple with those questions, but sometimes that's when you're the most transparent with yourself, and that awareness helped me in my relationship with my mom during her illness and her passing.
So let's make sure that we cover all three stakeholders. So one stakeholder is your mother. Yeah. The common lingo.
Definitely.
Another stakeholders were people who had invested in your company. And the final stakeholder was yourself. So in the conversation with the shareholders, how did that get influenced by your insight into how the direction of the company became set?
They had so much trust in me, and luckily we have very aligned investors continued through this day for Prontopia, which is especially valuable. And the sincerity and the integrity with which I arrived at that conviction, they saw as a strength for the company.
Was there at all hesitation about like, how do I broach this news with them at all or anything like that?
I also had to chart the metrics. I mean, you still have to put your data where your mouth is. So
yes.
I think there's always consideration from our board today of how do we support the founder and CEO in what's going on outside of the company, because that's important, but you still need to present. There's classic assumptions for early stage companies that somehow undertaking social impact initiatives early would siphon off resources that otherwise would be going toward growth. So what I did, Slim, actually was I modeled up the opposite. And that data proved true.
Got it. So even though there's some kind of bias or presumptive attitude towards social impact needing to be something that's an afterthought, the investors you had when you broached this topic of my mom just had cancer and I had a deep reflection on the direction of the company, and this is the direction of the company that I want to take it to. And they were actually perceiving that as a level of sincerity and integrity, that they were very much in line with you. Is that right?
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely. 100% supportive.
Great. And how did this insight impact now your responsibility as a caregiver to your mother?
That's where some complexities come in with empathy as well. My dad was also suffering from a degenerative illness. And when I told him the news about my mom, of course, he was very sad, but he said something very strange that I didn't have a context for. He was distraught and he said, she's just such a beautiful, vivacious person that this is hard to believe. And then he referenced a time earlier in their relationship. And he said, I tried to bring her back. He said, she went to that place and I tried to bring her back. And my dad had Lewy body disease. So he didn't always speak at that time.
What is this? I don't know what
he had Lewy body dementia. It's a degenerative brain illness. So he said, I tried to bring her back. He spoke of her so beautifully, which is very healing, I think, for any children of divorce. And then he referenced a turning point, and I didn't know what it meant. And so I just had that in my mind. But that cued me to see her outside of myself.
What does that mean? How did that help?
Because he's telling a story about her and something that he encountered with her. I'm assuming this is before I'm born, and I'm just seeing him relate to her. And it made me think of my mom as a young woman, and that my dad saw something happen, or what's going on here. And so it just took me, and I think that's a key piece to the journey toward empathy. Yeah.
Yes. So there is like this sort of sliding door moment, if you will, when your father left this sort of cryptic remark about having to bring her back from somewhere. And then, although you didn't quite understand what that meant, the fact that he was talking about your mother in a period of time that you imagine were before you took you out of you being simply her daughter to a kind of a person that can more objectively see her. And is that the sort of the shift that happened?
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened after that sort of sliding door moment?
So what happened after that was the painful period of her passing. And the next moment of breakthrough, let's call it, was that immediately after she passed, I was actually at a social impact venture conference. And it was too raw to be speaking of her passing. So a leader in this space in the United States was just visiting, and he didn't know that my mom had passed, but his mom had been a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist and very accomplished, also through her work in journalism, tremendous advocacy. So we were just sharing about our mom's careers. And then what's interesting is that in a quiet moment, he said, well, I know from my experience that probably wasn't always easy for you. So to have someone else name your dragon, it is a relief.
What emotions did you feel when you heard that?
I felt recognized and I felt empathy. Yeah, I felt known.
And this person had gone through a similar experience in some ways.
Yeah.
It's a kindred soul meeting in the same physical space at the same time.
Yeah, it was tremendous. And again, as we've talked about, I could picture myself when that was being said, because it was a shift in emotion.
What else did you feel?
I think that when you have emotional breakthrough, you feel hopeful.
Yeah.
And especially during a period of grief, I felt loved.
Yes.
And
in feeling loved at probably one of the most unexpected sort of times and unexpected location out of the blue.
Yeah, I mean, it almost gave me some self-love. I'm able to say in the same conversation how much I value what she did, and and it doesn't tarnish her achievements to say sometimes it was hard.
Yes. The two can coexist.
Yeah.
Both can receive love. Both can be respected for who they are, and both can be recognized and appreciated for the choices they make. There's a lot of beauty in that, and that, I'm guessing, opened you up in that moment with that person who was generous to share their own experience with you.
Tremendous beauty. Yeah. It made me feel connected to her and to myself. And that's very powerful at that phase of grief as well.
Yeah. And I would also imagine there's a little bit of burden that you were able to put down.
Oh, release. Yes. It was wonderful. Yes.
What do you think was the thing that you were carrying that you were able to put down with this person's permission?
Probably guilt.
Yeah. That's a heavy burden, right?
Yeah, because you think you should be feeling one thing, but you're feeling another. So when you're able to reconcile those conflicted emotions, you just feel whole, and you can put guilt aside. And that enables you to actually love in a more full way towards my mother and others too.
Right. Yeah. Now, how did these insights impact your relationship with your own daughters?
Oh gosh. I think that I related to them with more wholeness.
So say a little bit more, what do you mean by wholeness?
So now they're adolescents, and I actually just had more transparency with them and not trying to shield them from the painful parts of life, but to be able to see that as an opportunity for me to lay bare who I am as a person. And realize that when you're parenting, it's as much about them watching how you handle things as about how you're going through the motions and doing what you think is right.
So when you say you're laying bare, what kind of conversations did that entail?
So I put just more thought and care into involving them. We had to create some new rituals. I think when someone's gone, you don't want to stick with one family tradition that's too sad. So we just had open discussions. Let's create some new ones. Let's create ways that we know our rituals and traditions to honor our loved ones. So I would say just a much more open discussion about hardship out of necessity. But in doing so, I didn't try to carry the total burden. I allowed myself to be seen and say, look, this is hard for me, and this is what I'm struggling with. And I think as a mother, we don't always do that. But that adolescence with young women, that's okay. They're going to be there one day too. And if they saw you in it, then that's mothering too.
Instead of the typical role that I think a lot of mothers take on is, I will be the sturdy rock upon which you can depend on, or hell comes loose or whatever happens, thunderstorm. Or you're talking about a case where, okay, not that you are all adults yet, but still, I think we believe this is a time when we can all share as equals to a certain degree our own hardships. And I'm going to model this behavior by talking about how difficult this is for me. I'm not merely a hard rock, though I can be at times. I'm more than that. And this is, at least during this family ritual time, I'm going to put aside the rock side of me. I'm going to reveal the human side of me and talk about the difficulties that I'm experiencing. And as I model this, you two also get to share the responsibility with me in our home, in our family, in our togetherness, where we are supporting one another, where this sort of interesting betweenness kind of becomes the supporting structure, as opposed to mom being the you guys lean on me all the time kind of thing. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. And I think I would take it to another level. Please. And say that a lesson for all of us is that the best way to become the strongest rock is by embracing our vulnerabilities, because they're real for all of us. And that there's great strength in naming that we are vulnerable and sharing in your community and with your loved ones and with yourself what it takes for you to go out in the world and demonstrate strength and be there for others and be there for yourself.
So first of all, let's pause there for a moment and let me thank you for doing that, because I think it's very easy for somebody who hasn't felt that degree of responsibility for a very long time. I think time plays a critical role here. It may be difficult to appreciate just how courageous of an act that was to sort of be human in front of one's children, especially at a very difficult time like the one you're describing. And to add to the level of complexity, it wasn't merely a family situation. There was also professional aspects that are on the line. So you were dealing with what you were earlier referring to, a lot of complexity. And the complexity was not merely a complexity of a bunch of jumbled things. It was a complexity of responsibility.
Yes.
And that's the burden that we're talking about. And to be able to navigate that terrain with a level of maturity and the kind of self-love that you received and also demonstrated and modeled in return. I think there's a lot of beauty and courage in that. And for that, I think I just cannot stop thanking you and appreciating you. So thank you for that.
Thank you for featuring the story. I also had an awareness at that time that it's such a source of strength for us in humanity and has since traditional society. And I think grief and dying is an area where we've lost our way and where we should all be able to sit around and talk openly and tell our stories, because it's a core part of the human journey.
It is definitely.
It serves, yeah.
So what happened afterwards?
So there was also an important responsibility to be sure to honor my mom's life work. She had a tremendous impact. We wanted to make sure that what's needed goes on and that we're available as a family to make sure that the voices and the healing that she provided to so many, to the degree that it was appropriate, that we're available to make sure her work lives on. So in doing that, of course, for her as an academic, I had the challenging but beautiful job of going through her stuff, which we all have when a loved one passes. My mom's stuff just happened to be especially intellectual, creative work, tremendous letters. I had to really do it in pieces because it was hard. So I knew that she had kept journals.
Oh no.
She had them all in one box. So her entire life from 1968 until she entered hospice, she had kept a daily journal, habitually missing very few days. And so the discipline that this takes, we could just speak about her in general, but I didn't want to read all the journals, nor would that have been possible with so many years. But I didn't know how I felt about it because it's so personal, but here she'd saved them. So one night I sat by the fire and I just perused them chronologically. And the earliest journals are just a bright beacon. It was beautiful to read and beautiful to see her in that place. And then she appears to have encountered a pretty severe depression, pregnant with me. I'm reading and it does take a turn, the tone. And then I'm hearing perhaps my dad's words in a different light. And I continue to read pieces of the journals through to the end. And then you see that it lasts almost her lifetime. There's so much beauty, but it's a struggle. And then she's a deep believer in positivism in general. And so the last 3 years prior to her passing, her daily entries were filled with gratitude, but she's doing it as a practice. I'm going to take hold of this. And she wrote positive things every day. And then she died. And I just understood her.
What emotions did you feel as you were going through that diary?
I didn't really feel sad for her because I understood things must have been hard. So that's why I equate it with empathy.
No need to rush it. Slow down. Let's take a deep breath. And honor the beauty of your mother, who is a whole person, who has done so many wonderful things and left behind such beautiful legacy. What emotions do you feel now?
I feel gratitude because it's a gift. I think that's the story of empathy. You have to be listening. It's going to come from unusual places.
Yeah.
And how we cue our heart toward that. It's not just a sheer cognitive thing like empathy is this, and then there are certain things that you can do to arrive there. But so I feel gratitude and relief.
Gratitude, relief, what else?
I feel strong seeing people close to you, or even heroes. My mom was a hero, is a hero. And maybe the hero was grandma, and then it just gives you strength and you say, we're all going to be fine.
Yeah. And in some ways, the person has modeled the kind of power that is inspiring and contagious even.
Oh, yeah. And to understand what it took for her, what's behind that power. And I think that's just an important conversation about leadership in general. That you're making choices. And I'd always admired her work, but I felt very proud to be her daughter. Yes.
So talk a little bit more about that contrast of the person that you probably as a child mostly saw the strong side, the strong woman. And then reading the diary, you're seeing the inner person, the complexity of emotions from joy to depression to a person really working hard with discipline to express gratitude on a daily basis. What was it like to see the contrast?
It was actually really validating, to be honest, because there can be pushback if you're an intense person. And I've felt as we wend our way in life, sometimes there's just a sense of, can't you just go for mediocrity, be easier on all of us?
Just don't be a burden on us.
It's
kind of slide.
Intense. It's too much. And so to see it all encompassed and to read it that way, I was able to see the quiet moments for her by the river and where she found peace and joy. Also see insurmountable challenges, period of darkness. And then she looked toward the light and she brought so much light to others. So I think a little bit redemptive to say you can be the person that you are, and life is not linear. To achieve greatness, whatever that means for you, is complex.
Yeah. And I think what you're also referring to is the nuance of following your heart, right? Doing what you believe in, going in the direction that you would like to go in, or being yourself. I think there's the surface level understanding of those phrases as what's the thing that young people use these like YOLO, you only live once, or something along those lines. And then I think there is the reality of actually practicing that, and the complexity comes in with responsibilities, right? Now, if you have children that you feel obligated to take responsibility for, if you have shareholders to whom you feel responsibility for, if you have caregiving responsibility or family that you feel responsible for. If none of those existed, things would be a very different situation. But with those things intact, now the kind of the cliche phrases, follow your heart, to be your own self, or all those things. Now they take on a level of complexity that becomes very quickly not only seemingly impossible, but it's as if we should not do that. That's a major part of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would say when we view those factors from a community viewpoint,
yes,
then all will be reconciled. And I think that's where I have concerns today. Personally, core to social change is viewing yourself as part of a community, as part of this earth, as part of the last generation, as part of the next. We can make our decisions about our own goals and our path with those in mind, with those realities in mind. And we are all in this together. Then we can make our decisions from that perspective of our common humanity, rather than viewing yourself as an individual, irregardless of those factors.
Right. And I think you're getting at a very interesting cycle of this loop that forms in relationships, where the irony is that when you feel permitted to be yourself, despite all these burdens and responsibilities, that actually empowered you to take better care of the community that you belong to. You said, you know what, I am your mother and I am a rock and all those things, but I'm also human. And I want us to be together as a community of human beings, not merely as daughters and mothers. And in you modeling not only behavior, but a way of being together, made up a support structure, as opposed to daughters relying on mother and mothers always being the kind of the bedrock, so to speak. That transformed the family community. And in your relationship to your mother, recognizing another side of your mother beyond the parts that you were privy to seeing when you were growing up, brings back full circle in that, now the path where I began with that friend of yours, where that one conversation gave you courage to go on your own journey, creates a full circle where it says, wow, it's almost as if that was meant to be.
Yes.
In a very eerie kind of a loop kind of a way.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those things where if you try to divide anything, it no longer makes any sense.
Well, that's why I am very intrigued with your topic, because I see personally those stepping stones as a path to empathy. So I was really fascinated with how you decided to put this meaningful series of conversations together. When we're assessing our life journey, we can look at it from different milestones, depending on what we're looking at. But in these examples from my life, the breakthroughs came from human understanding, from recognition of me that led to recognition of others. And I think that's the human condition. And if we're not acting on that, we all need to evaluate how we're communicating.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for being who you are, and having been who you are, and having made that choice, that critical choice to be you. And I'm grateful for your friend who has that sense of receiving permission is such a critical juncture in our human condition, because of the interdependency, right? That we keep going back to. Permission isn't something like, oh, I'm waiting for your permission. Right?
Yeah. It's making me think that permission could also be viewed as another person telling you, and then you tell yourself, you matter.
Yes.
And
yes.
That I think is core to empathy. And it's, again, when we try to come from a cognitive perspective at empathy, like, well, you're in another person's shoes, but what does that really mean? Because that's a little bit of otherizing. It's not really about that. But first you need to just name and say, you matter, I'm listening. And then when you feel that from another, I think the virtual cycle of a greater capacity to feel empathy kicks in. And you suddenly see something differently. And I know that's probably what a lot of the themes of your series and your own story, that is one of the tangible benefits of empathy. Oh, I totally see this differently now. And I see the other person's point of view. And in that, I'm more whole in relating to those around me and myself.
Isn't that interesting? It's in the change of seeing somebody else or something external to us differently, it fundamentally changes who we are.
Absolutely. From an entrepreneur's perspective, the origins were a deeply personal choice to bring empathy into the company culture and how we're building it. And it's been powerful and one of the greatest strengths of the company.
Say a little bit more about that. What were some specific things that you did?
So we started in travel, and we are on-demand personal assistants in Europe, in cities that are complex, where cars can't get you from A to B. And as a social impact...
Explain a little bit more when you say personal assistance, meaning...
So if you need help, if you're in Venice, Florence, or Rome, and you're a mom with 2 kids, and you just arrived at the train station, and you're going to walk to your Airbnb on cobblestones and looking at the phone, you could use Prontopia. Someone will come and meet you. They'll take a suitcase. They'll walk with your children. They'll call ahead to the Airbnb house. They'll help you get a SIM card, or if you need translation at the pharmacy, whatever personal assistance you need, and especially unforeseen needs. So we were in travel, but we really built relationships with the city, and we did that in the sense of listening, listening to the stakeholders. So not just dividing customers and local assistants, building it as a community, that everybody's voice matters. We're together in this. Let's listen to why you want to be a part of this. Let's listen to your needs and really see this from a more of a holistic framework. And then we built some processes into our team and into how we built the company that pertain to all stakeholders. Tell me about your dreams and how can I help you get there? So that's a level of profoundness that really brings collective meaning to the company and for the nature of what we're doing. And so the reason why I say that it saved the company is because with COVID, we saw the shocking, practically obliteration of technology startups. And we were in Europe at the time when COVID hit early.
As Italy, for that matter, is that right?
Yeah, office in Italy. So the realities of what were occurring there. But the team has tremendous trust. And so we pivoted within a week to help seniors. It was a very urgent circumstance. I had already had that second vertical in mind because I experienced the need for this type of incidental personal assistance in caring for my parents. And so we immediately did what was needed in the communities. We listened, we saw others under practically wartime conditions, and the company was back in growth traction and in a new market now, helping seniors when and where it's needed.
Well, what kind of support were you providing for seniors?
Mostly delivering pharmacy items, documents, groceries. But because of the data on our platform, we can do that by zone. We have a very high number of assistants in Europe, and we were able to jump in. And then we did see a roadmap to that these needs existed before. And of course, our elderly population will be doubling. And we just, again, had the conviction to serve a new need.
So in some ways, this was going to happen eventually, but it accelerated.
Of course, you always have to have a plan as a startup founder that's going to go out the window as you find what the real plan is, what the market actually demands. And we were able to do that because of some key systems and processes that we built. But a lot of that was built, the reason I say empathy saved the company, it was built on a foundation, and that the adaptability that gives you is priceless.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is something very important, which is relationships, not transactions.
Absolutely. We actually call our services connections. And I think the era of dealing with things transactionally is behind us. It's just, we're heading into an era of greater complexity. And I think of addressing things from more of a humanitarian perspective and putting the mechanistic context behind us. And transactionalism is very mechanistic and deductive.
Right. And I think, once again, I think this goes back to that sort of theme of, it's not about there is a self, there's an other, and there's something going on. That's a very transactional way of thinking of it. I'm going to do something for you. You're going to do something for me. Isn't that a win-win? And it's not that. It's like where there's relationship built on the sense that it's not about what we do. We will figure out what to do together. And the thing that we do might dramatically change, but the relationship that has been built doesn't. And so the relationship doesn't exist, the moment the thing that we do change, we're like, why are we talking again?
Yeah, I feel we're in the throes of an ethical change. So for us as leaders in the community, how we relate to each other as entrepreneurs, embracing those winds of change with how we build our companies is our greatest opportunity today.
And I think to extend the analogy a little bit and to connect it to something we talked about earlier, we had used the metaphor of a rock as like this sort of sturdy thing that you can lean on. But in some ways, it's not that I am a rock. It's not that I am something that you can lean on. It's that the relationship is the rock.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my mom's nickname that I hope some of her students and colleagues will watch this. So her nickname, our grandmother was a Native American. Her nickname was Cloud of Swords among colleagues.
Cloud of Swords.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So the reason it means that, like, we view strength as a rock in that metaphor, but they were depicting my mom's strength as her adaptiveness with the clouds and the fierceness with a sword. So
what's the second word? The first word is cloud.
Sword, cloud of swords.
Wait, and what's the characteristics of a sword?
Strength, that she was fierce.
But
so I think that the reason for the nickname was that she had attributes that were very gentle, but don't believe she is not one of the most fierce people you will ever encounter if she's trying to drive something. So I'm only just throwing that out there as just playing around with words of strength and metaphor, because is the rock the strongest? And
I think what you're getting at is the flexibility or the adaptability that the cloud brings. So in some ways, rock may be strong to a certain point until it cracks, and then it's just completely obliterated. And you can't regenerate any of those. It's just broken.
And especially for us as humans, it is true that we've put certain, let's just call them bucket list things behind what we perceive as providing someone strength or stability, the white picket fence, or whatever. So it's an opportunity to define strength.
It gives me another level of appreciation worth articulating about what you did with your daughters, because I think what you started to do was demonstrate the strength in the relationship. When I let go some of my burden, which one may euphemistically say, it's my duty as a mother to be XYZ or do ABC. But then the moment we receive permission or give ourselves permission to put some of those down, at least momentarily, not saying completely oblivious to it, momentarily set aside, and then actually give other people the permission to step up, rise to the challenge, and come on board with me. Let's go together. And that will make it even more meaningful. I promise you. That's what you did.
I am grinning ear to ear. I can assure you I will be pulling that as a breakout quote from this podcast, because not only as a mother, but your exact words, Slim, as a CEO and startup founder. And there were some lessons in this journey of maturity in that too. I think as a founder, you need to be strong and have clear boundaries, but you also need to be transparent and show vulnerability. And that relates also to empathy, because that brings your family along with you. That brings the team along with you. It means that we're behaving in more authentic ways in the community. But I would definitely give a shout out for founders. I've had my lessons learned, and we have an amazing team. And that has really been key to my growth in my leadership role.
How many people do you have now in your team?
We have 8 now.
Okay. Oh, that's a great size.
Yeah.
As I'm hearing you tell these stories and reflecting, it gives me a level of pride in knowing that there are people like yourselves out there who are putting these thoughts and values into practice. And because it's not easy. I think that's the part that it's easy to forget. You go on YouTube and hear motivational speakers talking about courage or whatnot, which sounds wonderful. I've never met anybody who goes, I don't want to have courage. I think, but it's not easy.
No,
it's really not easy. It's very trying. And to be very honest, I think as human beings, there are days when we're like, oh my God, I just want to quit. I just don't want to do this anymore. Because like I've tried so hard.
Humans are founders. Yeah. I actually have a little ritual that I do to bring myself back to courage, where one of them is actually like quite honestly silly, but this is actually
Whatever
hilarious.
works.
And yeah. I can't even believe I'm saying this on a podcast. You know, Rocky, when he runs to the top of the stairs and he's ready for the fight and he's like up there in a sweatsuit on the Capitol. I'm not kidding. Like I'll actually just think of that image and then I'll just be like, I can do it. I can run up the stairs.
You don't think it's a coincidence that was a big best-selling movie?
Yeah. I'm like, Nikki, Adrian, come on.
I momentarily forgot about the whole Adrian part. It's like, no, I love you. Was that the line?
Yeah. They're part of it. They got him up the stairs and the rest is history. So that's my completely cheesy way to get back to courage.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What emotions do you feel right at this moment?
Oh, goodness. I feel proud and I feel satisfied and inspired.
Proud, satisfied, inspired. Anything else?
Emboldened.
Emboldened. Wow, that's something I haven't heard casually. I like that word, emboldened. What do you most feel proud about?
I always feel proud, and thank you for this opportunity, Slim. I always feel proud to be able to have opportunities to tell my story with the hope in mind that it will benefit others.
Yes, yes. And is that also what you feel most satisfied with as well?
The reason that I said I feel satisfied is because speaking about the experiences that I've had that led me to the realization of a capacity for empathy when previously I didn't have it, it was very satisfying to put the pieces of this mystery together and to say it outside of my head.
It's kind of like a puzzle. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. You framed the question such as that I already knew that I had the experience, of course, having accepted to participate. But when you share it, it can be really satisfying.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what do you feel inspired by?
I feel inspired. I always feel inspired by driving the conversation forward about how fundamental recognizing the realities of our common humanity is to social change. And I think a key function of that is always working toward human understanding. And as a part of that is empathy. So that inspires me. And I want the collective voices to rise. I commend you for this topic again. And I deeply believe that a lot of positive benefits will come from conversations like this.
Thank you. And I have a feeling that in some ways, even though on the surface, when you were describing your company, even though on the surface it may be categorized as travel or otherwise, I have a sense that what lies at the deeper level is the same. And in some ways, because it's the same, you can pivot and do a bunch of different things, but the core thing stays the same. Is that right?
Yeah. In the whole process, when I was asked, what are you trying to disrupt? I said, what I'm concerned about is that tech went too far in taking the people out. And technology is not being deployed sufficiently, incorporating people into how we build it. And so when I was asked, like, are you trying to disrupt travel? No. Are you trying to disrupt elder care? No. I'm trying to show that we can build technology processes and systems with people at the center to provide scalable access to needed human services.
Yeah, it's a prime example of a mission-driven company.
Absolutely, yes. That is actually the KPIs that we look at.
And, wow. And what's an example of a human KPI?
So we look at the time and duration that people are together, the context of the connection, and then we build out community activities, service events where we bring everybody together. That's been really meaningful for common human understanding. It was amazing. We did cleanups in the cities in Europe where pollution is a very serious problem of over-tourism. And so we came together with our local assistants, our customers who were travelers, and then city partners. And that clean windows factor, a clean city, that is an act of empathy as well, to just say, someone may have not known that litter and plastic was such a problem in Venice. We've done with UNESCO plastic cleanups in the canals, and then we did multi-city water plastic cleanups. And to have tourists join, and even families with kids, they felt like, wow, on this trip, I will totally view pollution differently now. And I met someone from this block of my hotel. And so
I'm a tourist. I thought I was merely going to go to Italy and somebody's going to come greet me and help me with my SIM card. But then I now realize there are things that I can actually do to contribute to the city while I'm in this city. So not only do I feel like a mere tourist, I actually feel like I'm part of the community in some way.
The place. That's exactly what we said. We said, we hope that when you leave, you will feel a part of this place. And that is where our mission really touches on empathy, because it also takes actions of bringing together. And we were really excited about that in the senior space now. I think also pertaining to the voices that are less heard. Intergenerational connectedness is missing in a lot of our communities today because of demographic shifts. And so how we're translating that in our post-travel market, we'll get back to travel one day, I'm sure, is to build community through the safest activities that we can do right now in a COVID environment to convey community. So we're definitely trying to put the people back. But that means that you as a traveler need to care. And the first starting place to care is to just connect you and say, hey, this is Slim, this is the city, he loves pizza, and please don't throw your trash in the canal.
No, but
and
it really makes me connect with the city as human beings, as opposed to a thing on a map or Instagram.
Right. And there's danger in commodifying a place and taking the people out. Now, with the elderly in our community, how we've seen that translate, and where it's same thing, different context, is the elderly have become increasingly isolated in our communities. And that's been a danger. They're valuable voices of wisdom. We need to attend to their care in a prideful and empowering way with dignity. But if they're not seen and they don't have channels for their voice, that's where we've seen this real disconnect, when intergenerationally their population will need more and more. So addressing that with community building, it brings new voices in. We can have my daughter's generation value elderly, hopefully influence vocational pathways for broadening supply of caregiver resources. But it is that starting point of empathy, of saying, hey, did you meet this person? Let's integrate these two isolated people.
Wow. Thank you for doing this work. I have a whole new appreciation for what the future might hold because of folks like yourselves building a company in the exact way that you are building it. You've opened my eyes up to multiple things in multiple dimensions in a very unexpected fashion, both surprising and meaningful. I appreciate that.
Thank you for listening and for asking. That's how with open hearts we can experience the surprising things that inevitably will have the biggest impacts on our lives.
Yeah, I absolutely believe so. Thank you very much, Shannon, for coming on the show and with the willingness to share your story and to do it with a stranger, no less.
Thank you for reaching out.
Absolutely. May you stay beautiful until next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey there, listener. Thank you for listening to the very end. I believe we can mature and innovate by navigating the difficult journey of realizing empathy in the face of tension. What I've learned from my own experience is that all of our challenges in empathizing with others is ultimately an opportunity to realize empathy with ourselves, to develop a greater understanding and appreciation of who we are and who we can be when we feel connected. And this journey is difficult. Let's not sugarcoat it. This is especially so if you go at it alone. So I envision a world where each and every one of us, from the moment we're born until the day we die, can feel certain there's at least one person we can reach out to at any given moment who can and will support us in this journey in a way that actually makes us feel supported. If you share this belief, please subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and also like and share this episode, as well as leave a review of our podcast so more people can enjoy it. And if you believe you know somebody who can be a great guest for our show, please send us email at podcast@realizingempathy.com. We absolutely love hearing from you. Thank you once again, and until next time, may you stay beautiful. What do you think was the thing that you were carrying that you were able to put down with this person's permission?
Probably guilt.
Yeah. That's a heavy burden, right?
Yeah, because you think you should be feeling one thing, but you're feeling another. So when you're able to reconcile those conflicted emotions, you just feel whole and you can put guilt aside. And that enables you to actually love in a more full way towards
Right.
my mother and others too.